Pesachim Daf. First email comes from Reb Yoni Fine from Lakewood, a big Talmud Chacham. He says he enjoys the classics on the app, and in fact, one of the classics taught him a new way to learn the sugya. So thank you, Reb Yoni. Second email comes from Stan. He says, thought you'd like to know, I have developed obsessive compulsive disorder. I come home from shul and I rush to do the daf. If I cannot get to it right away or finish it, I become anxious. That is such a bracha. In the decades of learning Gemara, I've never looked forward to learning it until I attended your shir. The medication for this type of anxiety is to be on top of the daf. Thanks for prescribing the cure. Thank you, Stan. Yesterday we learned the machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rabbah. Is it mutter lechatchila to bake on Yontiv for Shabbos, or is it only if you have guests coming hoyel and you could have guests, then you could bake? So the Gemara brings a raya from lechem apanim. The 12 loaves of bread, you bake them typically on a Friday and only get to eat them 9 days later on Shabbos. If Friday is Yontif, so you have to bake them on Thursday and you only get to eat them 10 days later. If Rosh Hashanah falls out on Thursday, second day of Rosh Hashanah is on Friday, so then you bake it on Wednesday and you get to eat them 11 days later. The question is, if you hold that it's mutter l'chatchila to bake bread on Yontif for Shabbos, why can't you just bake it on Yontif? Why do you have to do it on Wednesday? Why do you have to do it on Thursday before Yontif? The answer is because he's going to hold that you could use Yontif to bake for Shabbos if Shabbos is immediately after Yontif. But in this case, it's 9-10 days later, 10-11 days later. You cannot do so. Rav Shimon Gamliel holds you're permitted to bake on Yontif even if you're going to eat it on Shabbos that's 10 days later. But not on Yom Kippur. You cannot bake on Yom Kippur. What about Shtei Halechem, the two breads that you bake for Shavuos, that goes together with the shlamim that you bring on Shavuos? Why can't you bake it on the first day of Shavuos? Why do you have to bake it a day before and eat it 2 days later? So the Gemara tells us, because it says in the pasuk lochem, this idea that oichal nefesh, you could cook, bake on Yontif, is only if you do it for yourself, but not for the Beis Hamikdash. What about Rav Shimon Gamliel that says you could cook on Yontif for the Beis Hamikdash? He learns that the word lochem doesn't tell you that you can only cook for yourself. It means you can only cook for yourself, you can only cook for a Jew and not for a non-Jew. The Gemara tells us an amazing riddle. There's a possibility of someone who plows a field, chayresh telemechad, he plows one row, and by doing so he gets 8 malchus. What's the case? He used a donkey together with an ox, or any two types of animals, and the ox was designated as a karban, and by using that you're over 1 lav, and the donkey was designated as bedek habayis, and if you use it you're over ami'ila. So by plowing with these two animals, you're over on 3 things: shoy v'chamar yachtav, hegdesh ami'ila. In addition to that, it happened to be that he was plowing in a cemetery, and he was a kohen and a nazir, so that's 2 isurim, and he was plowing klayim. Klei akarim took grain and he put it into the ground, so he made klayim, and it was yontif. On yontif you're chayiv b'mezid malchus. On Shabbos, however, it would be skila, so therefore we're talking about yontif. Oh, and it happened to be Shemitah. So why don't we say hoyel, since it's possible that he'll find dead birds that were shechted and they need kisui adam, he needs this dirt to cover up the blood. And the Gemara says that we can't be talking about just regular dirt, we've got to be talking about mud. Mud that's moist. So you could plant with it, but you cannot do kisui adam. And that's why he's over. And we're talking about mud and not stones, because stones you could always grind up on Yontif, kila achar yad, if you do with a shinoi, and then you wouldn't get malchus. Another riddle the Gemara tells us: what happens if a person cooks a gid hanasha in milk? There's a possibility to be chayiv 5 malchus of 5 different arbeiros. What are they? First of all, you're cooking on Yontif shaloi l'tzarech. You're eating a gid hanasha, and you're eating basar b'chalav, because the gid hanasha is yesh benois and tam, and it's together with milk. You're also cooking basar b'chalav. That's the 4th one. The 5th one, at the maskana of the Gemara, is because he used wood of hegdesh. Now the Gemara doesn't say that the 5th one is because he made a flame, because you're allowed to make a flame on Yontif if you're going to use it later on for another meal. The Gemara also doesn't use the example of an avela, the gid hanasha of an avela, because that wouldn't fit into Reb Chia. Reb Chia says that there's 2 isurim that one gets for achila, eating the gid hanasha and eating basar b'chalav, and he doesn't say it's 3. If it would be nevela, there would be 3 for eating. We're not talking about wood that's muktzah. You could have a havamina that the concept of muktzah, not having something designated before Shabbos and Yontav, is muktzah. So perhaps the wood wasn't designated. That's not true, says the Gemara. It's not muktzah. You'd say there's a concept of muktzah, and the Torah says but there's a pasuk in Yecheskel that has different words, and from each word we darshan something. Pasuk says seh, that when you bring a carbon tamid, it should be not a bachar, only something that could be from an akeva and a zachar, and a bachar can't be an akeva. Achas, says the pasuk, and it cannot be meiser behema the 10th. Minat soin, and not a palgas. A palgas is a sheep that's between 12 and 13 months. Before it's 12 months, it's a keves. After 13 months, it's an ayil. In between, it's a palgas. And Min Amosayim tells us the idea that arla is batal in 1 in 200. Mimashki Yisrael, it's a suuda, something that is a suuda that Klal Yisrael is allowed to eat, and not from food, not from wine. We're talking about now nesachim that Klal Yisrael can eat, that's tevel, trumas and maizos weren't mufresh. But nesachim, wine that's a muktzah, somebody said, this is not something I'm going to be using now, that's okay to bring. So you see the idea that there's no muktzah. Why? Because the Gemara says that this muktzah is not a problem because it's not within itself, it's something external. Somebody said and decided that this wine is not going to be used. But if muktzah is an isser d'oraisa, we wouldn't make such a distinction. That's a right, that's only an isser d'rabbanan. And another question the Gemara says, that if the problem was muktzah you wouldn't be chayiv on, because you're over on the bishul and the wood, and the bishul happens together, you wouldn't be chayiv too. On Yontav you can only be chayiv on one thing, whereas in Shabbos you're chayiv on each and every shogeg. Have a wonderful day.